So as you can see, we are here in the city at Balboa Park. We are here to help Soul Church kind of refurb their building here that they're going to be opening up and making a community center right here in the city. I love the church working together, getting outside of the church to reach people right where they're at. And that's what happened in the book of Acts. You see, the people of God were all together, gathered in Jerusalem, but persecution came and it ended up Christians were being thrown in jail. Families were getting torn apart. Some were even being killed, as we read about Stephen being killed. And this persecution resulted in the church actually being scattered all over, well outside of Jerusalem. And here's what's so awesome about that. Persecution, not great. But God's church and his design for the church is persecution proof. It's also pandemic proof. Because if the church is not a building, if it's not a place, but it's a people, then that means the church is unstoppable. And we even see that here. And one example of the church scattered, bringing joy to the city in Acts 8, verses 4 through 8. Those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. Now, we got to just stop right there because that's Jesus every day. They preached the word wherever they went. I mean, we just talked about it. Bringing joy where we wake, work, and worship. Now, just think what that would look like if you and I are sharing of the love of Jesus and the goodness of Jesus and the reality of Jesus everywhere that we go. Philip was led by the Spirit. He went down to a city in Samaria, which also was an amazing thing in and of itself because Jews didn't associate with Samaritans. They insulted Samaritans. They ignored them. They avoided them. And Philip is being led to go straight to a place that they never would otherwise go. And he proclaimed the Messiah there. When the crowds heard Philip and saw the signs he performed, they all paid close attention to what he said. For with shrieks, impure spirits came out of many, and many were paralyzed or lame were healed. And this is the clincher right here, verse 8. So there was great joy in that city. God wants to bring great joy to this city. God wants to bring great joy to the city where you're at. And how's he going to do it? Through people just like you and me following the Spirit into places where maybe Christians would never be expected to go. And it's going to get messy, but God is going to send darkness fleeing. And God is going to bring his light through people just like you and I if we're willing to follow him there. An example of that is Aimee Semple McPherson. She was only in her 20s, but she was a great evangelist that God was using back in the 1920s. She actually became the founder of the Foursquare denomination, of which the Father's House is a part, though she never set out to start a denomination. She just set out to go wherever God was leading her to go. And God led her here to San Diego. Now, her arrival in San Diego was perfectly timed by God, because San Diego was known at that point for having the highest suicide rate in the nation. It was actually called the jumping off place because people would come here and end their life. Aimee Semple McPherson came here just following God's leading. This was fresh off of a pandemic, interestingly enough, where Aimee had almost lost her daughter to the flu, this dangerous flu that was going around. And God had built through that experience a faith in her that God wants to heal people through her. So she came here in the most interesting of ways. She actually introduced herself into San Diego by climbing into a boxing ring fresh after the match was done. The whole place was filled with about 3,000 people that were all just bloodthirsty, and they were angry at this woman walking into the ring. And she said, God has come here to bring revival to San Diego. They started cursing her and yelling at her and saying, heaven peddler, get out of here. And then she said, I challenge you, you bring the worst sinner in San Diego right here and God's going to change them. And that's exactly what God did. Because people were afraid about being inside, she actually had the gathering here, right here in this pavilion. 3,000 people filled all of these chairs. Hundreds of people brought up onto the stage. There's pictures, verified accounts of people being brought onto the stage in stretchers and God miraculously healing them right where they were at. It was a full-on revival. truly one of the greatest revivals in our nation, specifically one of the main revivals that changed San Diego, changed the atmosphere in this city. And when people asked her, wow, this is amazing, you're such a great healer, she said this statement that really caught my attention. She said, no, 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 Jesus is the healer. I'm only the office girl who opens the door and says, come in. Now, I was here a couple weeks ago, and I felt we were working with Mark Wymore and Soul Church, and I felt like I needed to just come here and just pray. I didn't spend much time here before. I wasn't aware that this month marks the 100-year anniversary of that San Diego revival, when Aimee Semple McPherson, just an obedient woman of God, stood on this stage, saw thousands of people come to Christ, hundreds of people healed. And I felt like when I was walking through this place, like God was saying he wants to do it again, but it's going to look differently. Now, how is he going to do something like that again? It's going to be through people like you and me, following God into places we otherwise probably wouldn't go. Our community builder discussion question here is, they preached the word wherever they went. Philip, Aimee, you and I, if our God did it then, he wants to do it again. The joy spread like wildfire through this city, through the city in Samaria. What if revival starts wherever we go this week? What could that look like? Well, I was in a staff meeting and I was kind of sharing of this experience here at Balboa Park. And then I was talking with our executive pastor, Josh God Connect, and this sparked something in him. And he said, wow, God's been speaking to me the very same thing. In fact, I want to invite Josh God Connect to kind of share a little bit more about what God was speaking to him. So Josh, you know, you and I have grown up in the church, and a lot of times there's this religious vernacular where we say, God spoke to me, and people are like, wait, did you hear it? Like, hello, Josh, you know, and it's not like that, is it? What's it like for you?
No, I think God speaks to all of us in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
For me, when I use the phrase God spoke to me, sometimes that's imagery, and in my mind's eye. Sometimes it does feel like conversational. Sometimes it's more like, a download. You download information to your computer. The information wasn't there before you downloaded, and now all of a sudden the information's in your head. That's several of the ways God speaks to me. A lot of times, God may speak to you guys through just natural circumstance.
Yeah.
I love what you said about Aimee Semple McPherson. The way God led her to revival was in circumstantially looking at the needs around her, going, God needs to move.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so, God can speak a lot of ways, but specifically,
yeah,
what God's been speaking to me about is more with my mind's eye, some imagery, and even some conversation, downloads. Right about the same time you were here praying was where we found out in the staff meeting, right? And we kind of worked backwards and said, wait a minute, last weekend, God was saying this to me.
Right, and I know that the word revival has been bandied about so often all growing up that it almost is innocuous. It almost doesn't mean anything anymore. Revival meetings and people kind of hyping this up, and then you look at the fruit of that and you're like, I didn't really see anything happen except for kind of like a religious party.
Right.
And so I'm always tenuous about sharing a word about revival, but when I felt that stirring while I was praying here, you said, no, God's been talking to me about revival too.
Absolutely. And it started a while back, and a couple of years ago, God has been setting this up for me, but recently, within the last few weeks, God's revisiting that subject with me. And when he uses the word revival, what he impresses upon me is that it's not an event. It's not necessarily bound to one amphitheater location, one church brand or building.
Right.
The words God told me is my heart is that I would be everywhere, all at once. And a couple bullet points I think are really important for us to know as God's church about this revival is, one, he's told me it's not going to happen as an event or bound to a single location, but it will be in the everyday life of every person who's made room for God in their lives. Two, he impressed upon me that when I move and when the revival happens, there'll be two people, for instance, watching and encountering the same moment, and one of those people will see God come alive in that moment, and they will be in awe of who God is, and they will see the divine miracle working power, and the very next person, or the person right next to him, will actually miss it. Will look at it and chalk it up to circumstance, or they'll be able to rationalize their way out of meeting and experiencing God. And so I think you're right that the word revival has these attachments or associations for all of us, where we think of a big tent in a field, and and people falling over,
Right.
and it could look that
Yeah.
sensational.
Yeah.
But what I think God is really trying to say is, I want to bring an awakening, a wake-up call to all of my people, that they could start encountering my life, my divinity, my goodness, and distribute that through their everyday life. One more thing that was really important that the Lord put, He actually gave me imagery at one of the times we were talking about this revival, and He gave me imagery of, moms and dads on the sideline of their kids' soccer game.
Yes.
He gave me imagery of people praying over coworkers at work. He gave me imagery of people doing their hobbies and fishing, and all of a sudden miracles and prayer moments happening. And it was, again, this imagery reinforcing this idea that He's not choosing to bring people to a moment for this revival. He's bringing the moments to where the people are. And He just wants to be with us in our everyday lives.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that you're doing that through your company, Adamo. I love that God is challenging us as a church, because it's not going to be one moment. It's going to be every moment. It's not going to be one place. It's going to be every place. It's not going to be one day, Sunday. It's going to be every day.
Right.
And He wants to use, like Philip, he was anointed to just wait on tables. And God used him to reach an entire city that felt left out from God's love and care, bringing joy to that city. Aimee, she was just a 20-year-old girl that just said yes to Jesus. Like she said, I just opened the door and I say, Jesus, you come in.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering where maybe you and I can be that one that just says, I'm just going to open the door. And maybe that's the door of our home. Maybe that's the door of our workplace. But ultimately, if every single one of us who believe and follow Jesus open that door to what Jesus wants to do, we will see revival.
Absolutely, we will.
Yeah.
That's my favorite thing about when God speaks. It's going to happen.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
We don't have to make it happen.
Yeah.
It's just our invitation to participate or sit this one out.
Yeah.
And I, for one, want to participate.
Right.
I'm looking for it.
Yeah, I don't want to be the one to explain it away.
No.
Right? I don't want to be the one that's just going, no, that wasn't God. That was just me. And so we just really want to challenge you in this, and we really feel like God is positioning us to join Him in an adventure in these months ahead. And I just want to thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
I'm really excited about what God's going to do next.